Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the importance of African American history at the 21st century. And we have with us to talk about the importance of the African American history experience at the 21st century, Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University. And of course, Dr. Sanford, let me welcome you to the show this morning. And I know that you're no stranger to any members of our audience. You've been with us on a number of occasions. And I'm glad to have you here today to talk about the significance of the African American history experience at the 21st century. And so let's start off by having you to give us some information about your background, your education, and some of the things that were important in terms of leading you to us this morning, and then we'll talk about other things.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and it's always a pleasure to be here. Again, I'm EKSanford. I'm a professor of sociology at Tennessee State University, and I did my doctorate degree at Howard University in Washington, D.C., as well as a postdoc at Penn State University. One of my positions that I've held in the past that I think is very significant and related to today's topic is being Director of Africana Studies at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana, where there was a very strong aim at that university as one of its missions to understand the importance of African American and other minority groups' history. So I think that is something in my particular past that makes it relevant for me to be here today. But in addition to that, I would like to say, in reference to that, I have a specialization in looking at the African American experience, the history of it, understanding certain social issues and problems related to racism, minority group problems, health and wellness, and disparities that might lead to high crime rates within the American society in which we live. So I think this whole idea that what we're talking about today, the significance of African American history, is very important, because it is indeed something that we all should share in and understand from an earlier age to the present as well as in the future.
You know, as a matter of fact, this is the beginning of the African American history experience known as the African American History Month. And you might say a word or two in reference to the African American History Month, Dr. Sanford, and then we'll get into why African American history is important. But let's start off by having you to say something about why this month of February is important.
Okay, and I would like to try to give significant credit to Dr. Carter G. Woodson. He was the one that really invented the importance of having African American history, and it was a day, having African American history today. And Dr. Carter G. Woodson felt very strongly that it was important at that particular time to then have something that would give everyone within the society and culture in which we live in some idea about the contributions that African Americans have made from slavery to freedom. And then, of course, it turned into African American History Week, and that went on for the longest time, and now indeed is African American History Month. And in many institutions of higher education, many other industries, economic, business, they will give actually some significance and time to talk about the contributions of African Americans this particular month. And so it's very significant and important to do that. And it's a welcoming thing to do. And I'm hoping today we can get into how it is still relevant and important or significant today as it was a long time ago. When the Miseducation of the Negro was written many, many years ago, and how the importance of having African American History Month, week, day is important, and even throughout the year, because it helps us to have a pretty good understanding about ourselves, the culture, and for other groups to have a significant understanding of that population as well.
As a matter of fact, I think, as you mentioned, Dr. Carter G. Woodson believed that unless we had the understanding of all ethnic groups within the United States, we really wouldn't have a good understanding of what America is all about. And I think that the ability to sort of carve out in this particular month, it's not to say that African Americans are more important than any other ethnic group, and et cetera, but I think it does give us an opportunity to highlight, as you've indicated, the African American experience in the United States. And I think, as you indicated earlier, from slavery to freedom.
Yes.
See, we were the only group that were slaves in a real sense in America. And so I think that our story is especially good. And so what we'll do, we'll take our first commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll allow you to talk about the importance of the African-American history experience. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. I see they're building the African-American history structure down on Jefferson, on 8th and Jefferson.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a large building.
It really is.
I was impressed by what I see, the structure of it going up. And so, yeah, it's...
Ready when you all are.
Okay. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. EKSanford, a professor at Tennessee State University, and he's giving us some information in reference to the significance of the African-American history experience. Doctor, let's see if we can pick up and give you an opportunity over the next 8 minutes simply to talk about some of the things that in a real sense, you teach daily at Tennessee State University, some of the sociological information that our audience might not be familiar with.
Okay. Well, thanks so much again. And I say that in reference to African American History Month and the significance of it. We can be thinking about any social issue or concern that might be quite relevant within the society in which we live in, within the culture. And Dr. E.B. Taylor defined culture as that complex whole that entitled or encompass customs and traits and anything that could be passed down from one generation to the next generation to the present. So when we think in terms of the importance of African American history, it is quite significant to understand the past, 244 years of enslavement, and how did that impact the culture of a particular population, as it did Native Americans and other ethnic groups that migrated to the United States. But as was said in the first segment, something unique was about the African American experience here in America, that enslavement took place for that time. So if we understand in the context of culture, one can see how something that's supposed to be passed down from one generation to the next generation was destroyed in any positive way. And that was strategically done in an effort to kind of control a group of people to enslave them. And there's much literature out there that one can bring up and discuss and look at that. And I think one of the significant reasons we have African American History Month or a day or a week, how it should be very much a part of the educational curriculum, so that people can have a focus or idea about that legacy of that culture that was passed down or not in a fair way passed down from one generation to the next generation, that could lead into certain thoughts about policies in the present. For instance, on many of our shows, we have talked about the significant amount of crime that exists in America. We have, for instance, 6.5% of African American males that make up the entire population, but 40.2% are actually in prison. Incarcerated. So when we look back at Dr. Charles C. McIntyre's classic book entitled Criminalizing a Race, she looked at it from slavery as coming out of slavery into Reconstruction and how people were re-entered into the prison system. And now we have the industrial prison complex where even today 40.2% of African American males are in prison, while they only make up about 6.5% of the entire American population. So we can see these disparities, but we have to systematically understand how they were connected to the past. That's why it is important to understand African American history and kind of connect it to what has happened or not happened fairly over a particular time period. So when we look at social structure, all of the institutions that make up the society, we can connect back early and see how there were a lot of dysfunctions for this segment of the population that was supposed to be passed down from one generation to the next generation, but it was all unfair. So when we look at disparities and statistics today, or social problems and issues that confront us with that particular ethnic group, you can see why, if we can understand how it's connected to what happened in the past to the very present. And that's not to say that a lot of positive things have not improved. With the advent of moving out of Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, that was a law of the land to keep things segregated, separate but equal, that moved into 1954, given that we are talking about African American History Month, with Thurgood Marshall, that became a Supreme Court justice that helped fight that and to overturn the Plessy case because it was inherently biased and unconstitutional. And that helped people move forward in a very positive way. However, given the legacy, it also caused a lot of inequity within families who would not have had education, that could not have socialized the next generation in the same way that the dominant group could. So there was a infiltration from the 50s to the 60s as the civil rights movement took place, to the 70s with the Black Power movement, the Black Panther movement, to the 80s and with affirmative action, and now you have the millennials born in the 90s who might have this sense that they don't have any connection to what happened in the past to what's going on right now. And that is very relevant and important for groups of people to know the history, as well as the dominant group. And everyone who's improving, going into law, becoming a congressman or a senator, or even the president, to understand that interconnectedness, because it's in that connecting those dots of what happened to the past to the present that gives us some understanding of what's going on right now in the present.
As a matter of fact, as you made those statements, I was thinking that that's essentially what Dr. Woodson was talking about, Carter G. Woodson was talking about. That is, unless we understand and we see the situation of Africans within the context of the American experience, then we really don't understand what America is all about. And I think that I like that statement, those statements there.
Yes.
And just go on and develop it as you so desire.
Okay, and that's so true, but it's important not only for all ethnic groups, because when we talk about African American history, we're talking about a fairness within curriculum. And that was one of the things that I'd actually worked on as a movement in diversity in higher education. And that became institutionalized throughout America with the hopes that in elementary, junior high, high school, and curriculums in higher education would move toward much more information related to diversity among all ethnic groups. I teach a class that's called Minority Group Problems, where we can have a pretty good understanding of every minority group and what are some of the systematic injustices that might occur within the society that might prevent fairness. And some of this might be related to illness, health and wellness, such as obesity rates or heart attacks or high blood pressure. Some of those things can come from the invisible nature of oppression and cause depression and stress that might cause one ethnic group to unfairly have to experience it in comparison to another. We even look at social class differences, how you can have some who in the upper class and to the upper middle class across all ethnic groups that might have the systems that are present in society in a much fairer way, might have better health and wellness, while those in the lower class and in poverty might be born into a particular situation that would influence certain behaviors, and that behavior might lead to high crime rates, overweight and obesity, and deaths.
Very good. And so what we'll do, Doctor, we'll take our second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Now, what do you want to talk about this time?
Okay, well, we'll try to bring it to some close. This is the last segment, right? So I talk about in general, play a little historical context, bring up, since it's African American History Month, the people that contribute to African American history. They kind of lead it into some solutions and what we have to do, that type of thing. Might be a good closing. All right.
Ready when you all are.
We're ready. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University, and he's giving us some information in reference to the significance of the African-American experience in American history. And I think, Doctor, you've already given us a good overview in terms of the experience, some of the experiences of the African-American in American history. And I think that one of the things that you talked about has to do with the institution of slavery. And as long as we understand, get a better understanding, we can understand some of the issues that Africans have to face and how we have been able to, overcome a number of things. Let's pick up where you would like to do in this last segment.
All right, and I would like to try to suggest that there's a reoccurring pattern, I feel, of those millennials that are born into the 90s up to the present and coming forth. The parents have to be vigilant and understand that they need to try to help this generation and those to follow of the importance of understanding the history and the backdrop, if you will, of not only all ethnic groups, but African Americans in particular. And not only African Americans, but every group of people that live in America, even that come here, that should be something that is very significant for them to understand, because we were such a part of the very fabric of the development of the American society.
And we are the only ones that have been described as a peculiar people.
That's right.
See, and slavery made that for us. Nobody else had to undergo slavery.
Yeah, that's right. And since you brought that up, Dr. Kenneth Stamp has this excellent book that was entitled The Peculiar Institution. And in that piece, he talks about that whole idea of grabbing a group of people by the millions and bringing them and stripping them of their culture. And that's why I brought that definition of it up earlier, because when you take away the culture, you're taking away the very core of a group of people. But to control a group, that's what you would want to do. So this is still out there, and it's important for people to know it. Not only that group that millennials need to be refreshed on, but the dominant group needs to know it too. And only so you can have a decent conversation about the very fabric of it. Now, if we think in terms of Alex de Tocqueville, he had a classic piece that was entitled Democracy in America. And he was a French philosopher, and when he came to America, he thought that, hey, America had this great penal or prison system, and it was highly advanced in comparison to the, quote, old world at that time, France. But as he came to this country and was driving down in his horse and buggy and looked out the window, he saw people of African descent that were enslaved, in shackles, and working. And when he saw that and thought about oh my gosh, they have been here for hundreds of years, and there is still there, he reached in that classic piece that we would never reach a true democracy because of how it was founded on slavery. So when we look at some of the repercussions based on his philosophy and theoretical framework, we can see a lot of the inequalities that still exist today. And that's why it's important to understand African American history within the context of the American society, so everyone can have an inclusive way of understanding social problems and issues and try to find solutions to them. If not, then we will indeed continue the same process of racism, prejudice, and discrimination, one segment of the population feeling that they are dominant over another one, things in commercials showing inadequate type of fairness in actions and inclusiveness. So this is important. Coming out of the great W.B. Du Bois, when he said in the 19th century that the problem would be that of the color line. And we saw it in the 20th century. Now we're in the 21st century, and the color line is still a problem. Now when we link that to social class, we might find people might say, well, look, you had an African-American president, and there are people in Congress, and there are people that are doing well, even us, professors at an institution of higher education. But still, I'm going back to the statistic that I started with. We make up about 6.5% of the population, about 40.2 are incarcerated. There's still a problem. When we see the recurring pattern of police brutality and shootings because of the subliminal nature of how they look at a suspect and think that they are something that needs to be shot and killed versus just taken in. These are things that we have to be able to understand the history and how did those thoughts and patterns subliminally get in our mindset about that.
This is especially true when you start talking about young African Americans, you know, the young African American youth. Who face a real problem in terms of simply assimilating and being able to deal with some of the issues that many of us might have moved beyond. Not that we solved them, but we've moved beyond, but they now face them. The whole idea of Black lives make important, and Black life and all of those things. We've seen that, and we've experienced that, but it might have been under a different name. And so the name might have changed, but the attitudes that many people have in reference to the African American, especially the African American youth, these things are still present in spite of what we might call it.
And I think that's absolutely right. And these are the indicators that some of that racism and prejudice and discrimination still exists. For a youth group to come up like Black Lives Matter, like you mentioned, or other groups that have emerged to try to solve some of the problems. I have a feeling, though, that we have even a deeper problem with a majority of people not being conscious that some of the ills are still there. Again, that's why African American History Month is, and the history of African Americans is so important to be in the curriculum so people can understand that there is that importance that is there. And this can be done in literature classes, from understanding African American literature in 1746 to 1865 of the slave narrative. Very important information is there in that context of that time. And then from 1865 to 1919, looking at the Reconstruction era. Let's talk about just literature that is present and out there. Then from 1919 to 1940 of the Harlem Renaissance period. Very important information to know about those that contributed to scholarship and to letters, meaning literature. Right now with fences out there that will fall into August Wilson and the great literary pieces that he wrote, and now it was on stage and now in film. So those are pieces that our younger people need to be familiar with, but understand that contributions were made even before slavery was over, of the slave narrative, that people wrote about their experiences so that we could read about it and understand what was going on during that time period. That led up to the whole civil rights movement of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, of course the great Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois that wrote The Souls of Black Folks in 1903. Can't leave out Adam Clayton Powell and that whole movement, Andrew Young. Even Charles H. Wesley, the great historian that wrote about the history of the African American experience. These are people that have contributed to the social change that we still are able to thrive, made changes for the betterment of others, but we have to know that history of them so that we can continue to move onward and upward.
You know, Dr. Sanford, I think that the information that you're giving now is essentially the information that the two of us especially is familiar with. I mean, we know all about this, but so many of our young people. And I think that there's been a movement on the part of many people to think about perhaps avoiding or omitting this aspect of the African experience. As a matter of fact, when you talk about the institution of slavery, you've already indicated that we were there for more than 200 years. But in some of our textbooks, we don't even find that, that kind of experience. And I think the things that we're talking about today is important from the point of view of if people don't understand some of these things, then they really don't understand what America is all about. Do you? That's my point of view.
That's it. That's it. And I'm thinking to develop solutions for problems that we have to do it with that theoretical framework of understanding the past. You know, some of the great social sciences have indicated that. great C. Wright Mills, and understanding the sociological imagination, said we have to understand the past. We have to understand the biography, not only of the individual, but of the country, in order to see how things need to be corrected today. So yes, that's important, and we had to come up with a few recommendations, being inclusive with education, from in family development, from birth to age 2, from 2 to the 1st grade, through elementary, junior high, high school, if the curriculum was inclusive, if fair and support was given to an inclusive educational system so everybody could understand everyone else's culture and history.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Stanford, let me thank you for bringing that excellent information by. And I think that the more you talk about some of these things, I think the more our audience is familiar with that. And so we'll be, let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week to another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.